Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this last webinar in 2025 from the Nordic Chip Collaboration. I'm in the studio today with my colleague Steinar Brede, and together we will guide you through this webinar about venture and investments. The Nordic Chip Collaboration was established to elevate the Nordic region's standing in the global semiconductor arena. By uniting Finland, Norway, and Sweden, we are building a resilient, innovation-driven ecosystem, one that leverages shared strengths in design, research, and advanced manufacturing. The initiative is backed by Nordic innovation together with national agencies and aims to coordinate strategy, investment, and talent across borders. The topic of today's panel is venture and investment in the Nordic semiconductor sector, a space that's rapidly evolving and increasingly critical to our shared competitiveness. In September this year, we launched a report that highlights a clear opportunity. While the region has strong technical capabilities, early-stage funding remains a bottleneck. Bridging this gap will require targeted venture capital, smarter public-private financing models, and stronger alignment between startups, corporates, and global players. We're seeing momentum from EU instruments like Horizon Europe and EIC Accelerator to national innovation agencies stepping up with blended finance and strategic matchmaking. But to scale, we need to connect the dots between design, intellectual property, manufacturing, and market access, and ensure that capital flows where it can unlock real industrial impact. Today's discussion is about how we, as industrial professionals, can shape the path forward through investment, collaboration, and execution. And with that, I leave the word to today's moderator, Steinar Brede.
Thank you, Camilla. We are joined here today by three panelists from Norway, Sweden, and Finland, representing leading venture capitalists and knowledge from the venture capital community. So today, we will explore how the Nordics fit into the global semiconductor ecosystem and why this is a critical moment for innovation. And go ahead with looking at the trends that will shape the future investments. We will try to structure this webinar into three themes. First, we will discuss the Nordic semiconductor ecosystem and how that fits into the global context. Then we will look at the timing and investment strategies. And finally, we will dive into the technology convergence and future trends. But first, I would like the panelists to introduce themselves. And we will start with René Krumhauf. He's the founding partner of Cloudberry Venture Capital. Could you please tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do, René?
So thanks for having me. It's very nice to be here. So as said, my name is René Krumhauf. I'm the founding partner of Cloudberry VC. We're a Finland-based VC that is dedicated around the themes of semiconductors, photonics, and advanced materials. We are essentially Europe's first semiconductor-focused VC fund. We invest across Europe in pre-seed, seed, and A rounds. Look for great companies and support the Nordic ecosystem in doing so.
Thank you, René. Going up to Mala Valroy. You're the investment manager for Industrifond. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Absolutely. I am a scientist turned entrepreneur turned VC, and my road to VC went by very large companies, including Ericsson. So it's really wonderful to be able to connect those dots here for you today. I work at Industrifonden. We were founded in 1979. We have 500 million euros assets under management and 65 portfolio companies and counting. We usually invest in seed Series A across the Nordics. We have a very clear thesis-driven approach, and our future of compute investment thesis has a very big capstone, which we think is a semiconductor, so where we've been focusing a lot of our investments. So pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you. It will be quite fun to have you here. And at last, we have Alex Bergo. He's the head of AI and venture capital of Innovation Norway. He's based in San Francisco and he's joining us from there. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. I'm also looking forward to this. I'm not a specialist in chip manufacturing design. I'm so excited to be on this panel with you guys, and I'm so excited that we now have very specialized funds coming up in the Nordics that shows a lot of maturity for the market. We are, however, working a lot with deep tech funds here in Silicon Valley, and so I get a lot of feedback. I introduce companies to those funds, and we work fairly closely together. Most recently, we had a fairly large event on AI and energy where all the large chip manufacturers were present. The CEO for ARM, for instance, was talking about what their futures look like. Same thing with some of the larger telecoms in terms of how they work with rack manufacturers to create efficiencies. My background is AI for the most part, and lots of academics too, and startups in Silicon Valley.
Thank you, Alex. We will start out looking into the Nordic semiconductor ecosystem and try to see what that is into the global context. So I will direct my first question to you, Mala. How is the Nordic semiconductor ecosystem positioned compared to global hubs like Taiwan, US, Korea, Israel?
I think that's such a great question. I think it's important to note that I think that we're not trying to replicate the mega fab model here in the Nordics. I don't think the Nordics should or wants to compete on volume manufacturing or capex plays. What I think we're excelling at and really demonstrating traction in is specialized intelligence where it comes to photonics. We are looking at advanced materials coming up. We're seeing a lot of chip design. So there's a lot of these synergistic aspects, power efficiency as well, clusters that are emerging, and they're enabled by a few things that I think are inherently Nordic. First of all, we have deep academic excellence, and the spin-out structure really does encourage commercialization of decades of research. And I think that creates a competitive moat that is quite unique. And then we have a strong industrial heritage and a legacy of companies like Nokia and Ericsson who've laid the foundation for a lot of these companies to find their first footing and test and iterate, and also the talent that flows in. And I think there's something about that talent that should be taken into account. There is some sort of systems level problem solving that's in the Nordic DNA, and you see it a lot in the entrepreneurship that is just so prevalent across the region. And then finally, there's an inherent belief around collaboration, trust, and sustainability, which then naturally guides innovations towards power efficiency or smarter, more energy efficient ways to compute. And we all know that that's sort of one of the critical bottlenecks that we're going to face up ahead. So the convergence of this, I think, is the contrast versus some of these bigger markets where you're going to see really big companies and bold bets in manufacturing. That's my take.
Exactly. What differentiates the Nordics in terms of talents and innovation and niche technologies? Because I think we do have, as you said, a few niches like power electronics, low power wireless, and so on. Is that particular in compared to other hubs?
I think we should be grateful that science knows no boundaries and borders, so it doesn't limit itself to certain countries. I won't say we can take credit for academic excellence in general. I think it's the entire world is pulsing right now, but it's the structures that we have around commercializing them. We have something rather unique with Professors Wright, for example, in Sweden, where if you were to spin out, you own your own IP. So there's inherently some of these aspects that make it easier for innovations to leave the lab bench. And that's so mission critical right now for things that are surrounding the semiconductor industry.
Interesting. Alex, do you want to follow up on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to follow up on it, but because I also agree, so it's a lot of my kind of talking points around focusing versus scale, right? Like focusing on being good at the specialized white spaces that exist in manufacturing, be specialized at the type of chips. I think there are multiple segments that Mala mentioned that I think is really good, but the idea here is to not necessarily go for the high volume fabrication right now. I don't think it's impossible, but it needs a much more concerted effort from especially government with policy creation that actually puts a lot of effort behind it in terms of resources. These are not cheap developments. And governments needs to understand that for this to be a thriving industry, it needs a lot of backing. And I think it's a concerted effort that needs to happen over very, very many years. I'm not the one to decide that, but I just know that this is a very CapEx intensive industry, and developing specialized knowledge further takes a lot of resources.
Exactly. Does these issues be in all supply chain, like in design, manufacturing, or are we all only talking about the manufacturing part of it?
Are you talking to me now? Sorry.
Yes.
Yes. I think you start somewhere, right? To build an ecosystem takes a long time. I'm not talking about the actual manufacturing. I don't think we need to do that right now, but I do think there's also sovereignty and security issues at hand that needs to be thought about. Can we produce some of this, right? And what type of chips can we produce? I don't think it's feasible in any short term to sort of compete with Taiwan on production, but it needs to be one of those things that we think about. I think data and compute and the trends in AI deals with deep security issues, right? We should be able to hold on to some of this processing ourselves, and then are we able to produce those chips? I also think there's a trend now where we're going from more deterministic chips to probabilistic chip design, right? Is that a gap that we can take advantage of and jump in? Right, there are all these things happening right now that is basically spurred by that gigantic launch that OpenAI had with their third version of the GPT, right? And I think all this development that is happening leaves gaps that are open to be filled by anybody. Like Mala was saying, science knows no boundaries, and I think at a global stage, anybody can compete if they're putting some effort behind it.
Exactly. René, I want to go back to you. And Europe has a strong heritage of deep technology. And what can be done to convert these talents and legacy into scalable, globally competitive businesses?
Yeah, so great question. And maybe I go a little bit back to what Mala said as well. So I think Europe has great examples where we have really created meaningful companies on a global scale in semiconductors. So we have, of course, ASML from the Netherlands. We have, Mala already mentioned Nokia. We have Ericsson. There's probably a few that I'm forgetting. So from that point of view, we have past and current big companies that have been successful. Big companies started somewhere as well. They weren't big from day one. And I think what is very interesting, at least when I moved to Finland 7 years ago, what I have been seeing and what I've been impressed with is the amount of talent, especially technical talent, that comes out of the universities, especially if you look at it per capita. I can't really judge it too much for Norway and Sweden yet, but I dove into it a bit for Finland. And then I think that is due to the heritage of the Nokias and the Ericssons here in the Nordics. Now, a very simple comparison. In the Netherlands, we have 3. If you are creative, it's 4 technical universities that deliver the talent. In Finland, we have 5 in Finland alone already. And, we're 3 times less people in Finland than we are in the Netherlands. Just to give you a random data point that tells you something about the talent. And then what I'm also impressed with, and don't worry, I will not only be impressed in this call. What I'm also positive about is, what the governments have done to support the ecosystem when some of these companies became great companies, but not super big companies anymore. And we have companies today from those days of, for example, Nokia. We have a Vario, we have a Distance, we have an IXI that all work on super exciting semiconductor photonics related companies. So I think there's actually, what should we do to become more competitive, or what should we do in the Nordics to become better? We already actually are doing quite a lot. So it's not all a misery. What I have seen, being operationally involved in startups, having grown companies from nothing to something big, having been on the investment side for a few years now as well, is what I see is that there is a certain lack of understanding in venture about these domains of semiconductors. How do you grow a company? How do you do all these things in these domains? And that means that some of these venture firms, they are a little bit reluctant because they don't really understand the domain. They're more accustomed to software and KPIs and customer acquisition costs and MVPs and delivering a product. And I think that is something, looking into the future, and I hope with Cloudberry we're starting it, and we're not going to be the only ones, and there are going to be many more, to get more specialism into these funds and to really start venturing again. It is a risky domain, but we are, at least as a VC firm, at least I am paid to take risk. It should not be stupid risk, but sometimes you also see a certain risk aversiveness in venture that I think is not what we should be. We should be venturing. We should go into the unknown, and we should aim high and aim big. And I think semiconductors at this juncture provides a huge opportunity for that.
Thank you.
I just want to, sorry, can I just jump in and say this
sure.
is exactly why I was so excited that there are more specialized funds, right? Because that creates that knowledge base that maybe founders that have deep technical knowledge don't always know how to execute, and they can get help from funds that actually have that expertise. I also do think that there's a big opportunity in the Nordics with that kind of coordination between research, venture, and fast policy execution, because we are smaller societies, right? Like we can really be kind of that trusted node of sustainability, security, semiconductor, like deep tech that has a purpose.
Very good.
And I think, if I can ping pong back on that one, so I think that's a good point, and maybe to get a little bit back to that risk-taking part, and I've been on the operational side. I've been at ASML for a while, and ASML right now is a super successful semiconductor company with their basically their monopoly on EUV, but they didn't get there by being cautious, and that's something in the Nordics that I sometimes see a little bit of risk aversiveness that I think we should try to shed and just do it. Rome wasn't built in one day, but Rome was built by starting. So let's start companies, and then at some point there will be a Rome. And I know it from the inside that the amount of financial risks that ASML has taken in their EUV journey, and there are more examples, is absolutely phenomenal. It could have gone completely sideways, and it would not be anywhere today. And I think that's sort of a lesson I also like to carry forward. It's like, be ambitious, be risky, because that gets you to places. It doesn't get you to places for many, but it gets you to places for a few.
Thank you.
I know we're going to derail everything you planned, Stina, but I really think that's such a incredibly important point. And if anyone remembers anything from this webinar, I think this, and just to add color, I think it's the Nordics' relationship to failure, whether it's a death sentence or a new chapter, is at the beginning of a chapter or the end of one. And I think our feeling often is that it's the end of the book and you're not allowed to fail, and we shouldn't take too big risks because think of all the things that could go wrong. And it's exactly what you're after. We have to be able to see this as an opportunity, understand that the road is tough, and accept the path anyway. That is definitely not as prevalent as it would be, let's say, in San Francisco, where if you walked up tomorrow and said, I want to go mine an asteroid, people will say, which one? So I think we need to push ourselves a lot further. If we are naturally cautious, we will be very good at the quality, but I think we have to challenge ourselves out of that comfort zone if we really want these things to scale. We're really good at starting up, but the scaling up is not going to be done through, comfort. It will be through conviction and courage.
I think we have moved into our second theme, which is actually the timing part. And Mala, if you can continue on that, because why do you think now is a sort of a critical time for the Nordics to invest into deep tech like this?
I think it's the convergence of time, talent, and technology, and it doesn't always happen. You need these things to be in the perfect constellation they currently are. The future of compute, the demand that's coming from AI and quantum, etc., it's really positioning semiconductors as a whole globally because they are the shovels for the gold rush. But within the Nordics, especially in Europe, we can see that the themes around supply chain resiliency, energy efficiency, these are things that we've been working with and can really deliver with ease, with competence. So that plus everything you heard from Alexander and Renee around the people that we have, we need to take advantage of this right now. And I see a lot of companies doing that. So I think that's the positive for the Nordics right now, where I think I get question marks in my mind around the timing is the capital that follows on in the later stages. And that's something we're still struggling with within the Nordics. Thankfully, we have a larger ecosystem. Money, like science, also apparently doesn't respect boundaries, which is good. But we'd love to see, as Alex pointed out, more late stage funds supporting the momentum that's building up right now as well.
So scaling might still be an issue here.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think we touched into this, Renee, but what do you think is the biggest misconception investors have when entering this semiconductor and deep tech compared to software and SaaS services?
Yeah, or for that matter, even other deep tech investors that are still coming from generalist backgrounds. So I think capital is good, and also to Mala's point, I do recognize that growth funding is lacking. There are some initiatives across Europe now that we will see some bigger growth funds here. So I think that's great. And in order to get growth, we need to mobilize, well, also by the policymakers, by pension funds to put more capital in this direction. But to go back to your question on misconceptions, and I think I touched upon it already a little bit, is that I think most of these funds, they don't understand the complexity of what they're investing in. And then what I typically hear left and right is that not so much on semiconductors specifically, but when it's about hardware investments, they say hardware is hard, it takes a long time, and it's very capital intensive. But those claims are typically entertained by people that do not come from the domain and do not understand the domain. And I'm not going to here preach that hardware is the most least capital intensive thing. But if we compare growth, if you grow a hardware company, what you're growing is IP. It's patents, it's know-how that can be very valuable. And when you're later stage, you're gonna spend capex. You're gonna set up manufacturing, or you build something, or you outsource the building. But all that money and all that financing you need for that is actually creating a lot of, Mara, I said it before as well, moat. It's real stuff. If I invest in capex, it doesn't mean that if my company goes sideways, that the capex has zero value. Now, if you compare it to software, there is no IP or very limited IP in software. When you scale your go-to-market stuff with SDRs, BDRs, and whatever they are called. And that is money out of the door, and you hope for the best that your scaling and product market fit worked. So I think investors can be less scared for this it's expensive and hard concept, because there's actually a lot of value you create in that journey of a startup that is not zero. Most of these startups, if they not become unicorns, they can still be fairly valuable. To give an example, this company Nilt from Denmark, where I was an investor in, it's public information, was sold for 300 million to a Taiwanese acquirer. And I'm convinced most of that has been know-how, IP, and all that stuff. So you can create huge value in these domains. So this is also a little bit of a shout out to investors. Don't be scared. You might not understand it. There's going to be more funds like ourselves that can help you understand it. And then, it's a huge opportunity to build great companies.
How important would you say for venture funds to have partners with technical and operational expertise then in these kind of settings?
We're building a fund where we are specialists. So, it's of course one of the most important things, I would say, but maybe I'm biased.
Yeah.
But what you see now in tech funds is that there are more and more people hired from domains with the backgrounds, either technically or operationally, from the domains they're going to invest in. But I do think it's important to get specialists into the fund also at decision-making level. Most of that you see that associates or analysts, we lack them on decision-making bodies. And then you run into that there's this conception that it's hard, it's complex, takes a long time. So then typically the ICs at partnerships maybe they do a deal here and there, but they're not all in on it. So I do think that is important. But of course, you can only do that if you specialize around it. If you're a generalist deep tech fund, say, you do a food tech deal one day, and then you do a climate deal, and then you do a space deal, then it's hard to get specialists all over in your fund. So I think that's one of the perks of being a specialist in that context.
Let's move a little bit to the investment structures. So Alex, do you have any thoughts on how you structure investments in these capital-intensive deep tech initiatives?
Absolutely. I think. René is pointing right to it now. With there are long time horizons on anything deep tech. There's a lot of IP. You don't really always know if there's going to be a product at the end of the pipeline that the market wants, because you're looking at a long time horizon, right? And so most of these investments would naturally be staged, right, by milestones. You hit certain milestones, it releases more capital. You will almost always have syndicates, even if it's just venture. There'll be multiple venture funds come in. But I think the normal trajectory, and especially in the Nordics, would be to get early support from government, and funds come in and build up even more velocity on the technology as it matures. I think it's underneath what my interpretation of what René is saying is also underneath here is that bring in the specialist funds if you're intending to invest in these companies, so that you can help validate the product and the company by somebody who actually has been in the industry for a long time. We see the same thing over here, right? Most of the funds that we work with have been operators. Most of them will have almost a requirement that they don't tell the companies is that in addition to the check, how do you see us helping you? Because if they don't have a role, if they can't play that extra kind of 12th man on the field kind of game, they don't think they can add the value that makes the company successful. So, but I think it's usually always staged and structured. It's SPVs of sorts. When somebody is investing with only the check, they use competent funds to help validate what's going on. I also want to say though, I think Mola was talking about it a little bit earlier with the big vision stuff. The venture fund, when you talk to them here, you have to have these big visions, and it should be not crazy, but not uncrazy either, right? So I was talking to a venture fund yesterday. They had 2 years ago some young kids come say like, we're going to shoot up data centers into space, and that on the surface of it sounds crazy, but they've now just shut up their first data center in space. That took them 2 years. And so the speed in which you can develop these projects now that technologies are maturing, I mean, cost of shooting stuff up into space is cheaper, but the same thing goes for attacking the white space in chips. But for funding, I think that there are other things that signifies deep tech. Investments are usually fairly large because there's a long time horizon, and the funds over here. I was talking to another fund on Monday. On day zero, they put up 40 million in a syndication with, I think the total investment was 60 million. In 2.5 years, they exited to Microsoft, and it was a chip company. So things move fast when you have a lot of funding to do so. So yeah. I think I answered 3 questions, 2 of which you didn't ask now. So
I wish I could disagree, but the best I can do with you, Alex, is maybe add some deviations from where I don't exactly hold one-to-one with you. One of them is that there's a really great report out by Hello Tomorrow and Lakestar, the deep tech report, the European deep tech report, and they go right for the jugular on some of these assumptions around deep tech being more capital intense and taking much more time. And I'm not saying you say that, but the perceptions that exist around that, and that there's more risk. And I think one of the most elegant things that they say is it's a different kind of risk. You take more technology risk, but you basically take zero commercial risk because there is nothing like that out there in the market. It's a blue ocean because they're making the market. And then we've tracked the capital in that report, and you can kind of see that perhaps initially there's more outlay, especially if it's a hardware kind of startup, but it does scale with VC metrics, and it does often catch up, if not exceed, the so-called software components. And that's the moat that Renee was alluding to. It's it kind of, I think it's really interesting for us who are in it every day how obvious this might sound, but when the capital that's directed at deep tech doesn't understand these fundamentals, it can be very difficult. So to your point, I think getting checks that actually are backed by the knowledge of what they're investing in is so crucial.
Thank you. I think we have sort of covered the timing aspects and the investment strategies, and let's move on to my favorite, which is the last theme, which is future trends and technology. Mala, what deep tech trends intersects with semiconductors? Because you already mentioned quantum and photonics. How do you see this convergence play out in the future?
It's a fractal, it continues in perpetuity. I think there's an interdisciplinary convergence that we shouldn't forget. There's incredible advances in advanced materials that are informed by physics and chemistry. So it's not just the photonics, it's not just happening at the macro level, but how and what goes into these chips will define their efficiency. We're seeing fascinating things happening on the memory side that is intertwining with biology as well. So I'm I have been in VC long enough to know that my crystal ball works as far as throwing a dart sometimes for the future, because it's moving so fast and the pace of innovation is incredible. So I think rather than a specific thing, I'm mostly trying to keep my pulse on where the intersections are happening in a meaningful way and how they synergize with each other.
Exactly. So where will you put your money for the next 5 to 10 years?
Everywhere in the Nordics.
As long as it's in Norway.
No, but in the tech stack, obviously, we think that the moat and the proprietary advantages lie the deeper you go in the tech stack. So we think that in chip design, we're looking at machine learning compressions, we're looking at the quantum aspects of it for the initial part, and then we'll see what the future holds.
Alex, what would you say something about this directions you are seeing in San Francisco and US?
Yeah, very similar. I mean, we're talking about the same things here, right? This is also a race to kind of become a leader. And I think the opportunity is now. I think we talked about it a little bit earlier, like what is the timing like? The time for entrepreneurs to run with it is always now, because you're hitting a spot in the future. I've been on the side of software where we were a little bit early on things. Had we had more money, we would have hit a market. But if you're too late, then it's already too late, right? But I think, it's the same thing. I think AI has sort of pushed hardware to become the new frontier, because we need efficiencies in all layers. We're talking about just looking at the investments in data centers and how fast things are moving. We also have to make sure we also remember that when you build the data centers, these chips get sort of displaced in a year with a full lifetime of about 5 years. Photonics becomes a major thing because you can save a tiny fraction of energy and speed up some things. You lower the heat, it costs a little bit less, but at scale, that matters a lot. So photonics is a major thing. I was talking to one guy saying like one rack has multiple miles of wire on it. And so those small kind of efficiency gains actually matters a lot on the downstream of things, especially as AI kind of increase in velocity.
I know this is a topic you, René, also wants to comment on, data centers and sustainability. And should the industry get smarter on how they build data centers, and how should they do that?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And it's, you can't have a webinar or something like this today in these days without talking about AI. So let's go there. Alex started it, so I'll follow up on it. And I think Alex had already a very good point. There's so much essentially copper being involved in data centers to transport electrical signals. Copper is also the main one in chips. So we can replace that by photons. Photons don't have resistance, and if you don't have resistance, you don't have heat, and you have high performance. So that's an obvious one. But I think what I find very interesting, there have been these announcements the last few weeks about OpenAI making deals of significant size with several companies, and the companies amongst them. But if you zoom into it, the metric is actually interesting. They call it gigawatts of compute. So the unit of AI compute has become gigawatts. I'm not sure whether the general public understands what giga is. It's probably something bigger than mega, but it's actually a bit crazy, these deals. Some were like 8 gigawatts, the other one was 10 gigawatts, or whatever the exact numbers were. And it's actually a pretty poor metric, because it seems like, hey, I got a bigger deal. My deal is 10 gigawatts. And I don't think people understand, that 1 gigawatt, give or take, 1 gigawatt is one nuclear plant that takes 10 billion in 10 years to make. So this whole thing becomes, a question mark, how scalable this is energy-wise. And by calling it gigawatts, you just make AI energy limited. That's, compute is currently energy limited. So you either need to figure out how do I get the energy in a sustainable way, but I'm concerned, you cannot build enough solar panels to work your way out of this one. And then the other part goes into that efficiency that Alex already referred to. So going to photonic integrated circuits, how can I communicate faster between chips, between racks in data centers? How can I improve clock speeds? How can I do cooling? Cooling is a big issue in data centers. Heat is your biggest enemy if you want to do compute. So I think there's a huge opportunity there. We of course all know NVIDIA, which, by the way, it's always interesting to say that the most valuable company in AI is a semiconductor company. So at least we can take credit for that. And NVIDIA, of course, is now king in the centralized data center GPU semiconductors. But I think there's a very interesting path on the efficiency curve to make AI more efficient, and that's towards the edge. So bring AI to your phone, or maybe even in your neighborhood where you live, and then towards your phone, and maybe eventually into your headsets or on your wrist or in your glasses for consumer-related applications. And that, I think, is still wide open who the winners are going to be. How can I run very dedicated LLMs on a very dedicated, optimized chip instead of switching on all sorts of 1 kilowatt each GPUs? Do it way more efficient on the edge. So that's just, we had to talk about AI, and I think that's where I see huge opportunities for companies, in cooling, in photonics, and in edge AI of what can be optimized.
Thank you.
Can I also add to that? Like you can already run small models on your phone, right? Ollama has a model that you can run on your phone. So this is just sort of a maturing of the whole ecosystem of applications that are coming out. I do think it's also interesting to see in terms of energy usage and how it's being sort of the denominator for compute. Jensen was on stage at GTC saying that in the past year, just because of how much more use of AI agents they've had to double their forecast in terms of how much energy is demanded for the future. In 1 year, the largest company in the world didn't know a year ago how much energy was needed to produce the use that we're seeing. So the uptake is insane. And I think that also opens up room for other types of technology and technology investments around it. For instance, we're attaching this to grids that were made 100 years ago. How do you stabilize a grid where you have a data centers that goes from 0 to 100 and their demand is the same as a city of 1 million people in a millisecond? So now you need to be able to stabilize. So there's so many opportunities that are coming out of all these large investments, and I think that just makes me more excited and to sort of be part of tackling those opportunities.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. I have one final question to all of you. And what emerging application area can we expect the Nordics to take the lead in the next few years? Does anyone have a good idea there?
So maybe I can take the first step, and then the rest of us can disagree or chime in. So I mean, we talked about AI and edge AI, but I think the other area where there's a lot happening is in wide bandgap semiconductors. So going to compound semiconductors for high frequency, for space, and for the electrification of our vehicles, or autonomous vehicles, for that matter. So I think there's huge opportunities there in that space to find a niche, and I think at least what I look for is to find a niche, and of course it needs to be a big enough niche that Europe will then have, and where the East and the West is going to depend on. So it's a little bit of an ASML model, or a little bit of an ALD model for that matter. And I think compound semiconductors are the other very interesting part, I think, where we can play a role. And to just circle back to where we started 45 minutes ago, there's a lot of that legacy know-how in the Nordics, which will probably help in that compound part. So, and whether then compounds you use for space or electrical vehicles or whatnot, from my fund's point of view, we are agnostic to sector. We just invest in the underlying enablers for it.
I can try and continue on that thread to say, I think just the sheer momentum right now with quantum, especially with the investments from Novo Nordisk in Denmark in the order of billions for this, the kind of semiconductors and chips you need are going to be a really interesting space to follow. We're seeing everything from topographical chips to nuclear magnetic resonance chips. There's different ways. Photonics, obviously, we've talked about. So I think these sort of new approaches that people are testing and trying to get to the qubits and sort of unlock that bottleneck will also be interesting to follow.
Exactly. Alex, do you have a final?
I think, yeah, I mean, of course, I agree. But I also think that we can continue kind of the reputation we built with sustainability, right? And we can also be energy hubs. We can work on security as a framework and sort of become Europe's trusted node. I think the collaborative aspects that we have in the Nordics, we can apply that further and go in deeper with, for instance, Netherlands has maybe a larger infrastructure setup to sort of widen that cooperation that we have in the Nordics. So I think that can bring a lot of business to the Nordics as well.
Thank you. We are running out of time, and I would thank the panelists for sharing their perspective. And we've gone through both the region, the Nordic, how it compares globally, and why this might be a critical moment for the Nordics to invest in semiconductors. Covered some of the future trends, and I think what we could say is that collaboration, we have the talents, we need the collaboration, we need some patient capital, and have some focus on emerging technologies. I would like to thank everyone for joining us today, and I hope this discussion was some value to you. And we encourage you to stay informed about our ongoing initiatives by subscribing to our newsletter and future events. So please engage in creating new collaborative opportunities, and thank you.